You're listening to the Literary Entrepreneur Podcast, Episode 3. Hello, welcome to this edition of the Literary Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Tyora Moody. We're looking to bring you book marketing advice that attracts readers. Today we're going to start this podcast with a question. So who is your target audience or readers? And before I go there, let's talk about branding. In your eyes, branding may consist of a name, a logo, a slogan, maybe even the design. But branding really, especially for authors, comes down to how readers ultimately define your books. I always tell authors when it comes to branding, the brand starts with you. Your name is on the book cover. So when people see your name or readers are spreading the word about your book, what do you hope they will be saying? Better yet, if you have been published for a while, what are your readers saying now? And I'm not talking about your family and friends, not even other authors. Some of us have author friends and we support each other by reading and critiquing each other. But I want to dig down to those who purchased the book. Those are the readers you want to be targeting, of course. So let's take a look at a few best-selling authors. You may or may not know all of these authors I'm about to call out, but I encourage you to Google their names or go to Amazon.com and search for them. I think most of these authors you probably are familiar with. So here we go. Beverly Cleary, Eric Jerome Dickey, J.K. Rowling, James Patterson, John C. Maxwell, John Grisham, Martha Stewart, Kimberly Lawson Roby, Mary Higgins Clark, Nicholas Sparks, Stephanie Meyer, Stephen King, Zig Ziglar. Okay, those are just a few names that I called out. If you're familiar with some of those authors, what comes to mind when you hear their names? In most of these cases, some of these high-profile authors probably had a team of people help define their brand. Did you know you can do this too? No, really you can. Besides, you may not have a big publicity team that these best-selling authors have, but what you can do is develop legions of readers. You just have to understand what you write and the audience you expect to purchase your book. So let me stop here for a moment. Whether I named one of your favorite authors or you have someone else you love to support, how did you first hear about that author? I like to say I graduated from Nancy Drew to Mary Higgins Clark. My mother, who was an avid Doubleday and Literary Guild member, she collected books. Anyway, so my mom had Mary Higgins Clark on the shelf, and when I received my first library card, guess what? I went looking for books by this author, and soon I would find books that were very similar, or they would be mystery novels, or they would have what I soon grew to love. I really love books with female detectives. So then I started to, as I go to the library, I would pick up books by Patricia Cornwell, because I really loved the Case Scarpetta series. I read some of Tammy Hoag's books. I started to like the detective Sherry McCone from Marcia Muller's books. And then I discovered Sue Grafton's books with her detective Kinsey. So I really started to become a big fan of whodunit or suspense thrillers as I branched out to learn about other authors. As I grew into my faith, I still continued to look for this genre of suspense thrillers. So as I started to branch out into reading Christian fiction, I discovered authors like Ted Decker, Brandolyn Collins, Terry Blackstock, Frank Peretti. All these authors gave me a whole other way to enjoy the genre that I have always loved. Anyway, I'm getting to this because naively, many authors may say, anyone can read my book. Well, your book may be written in such a way that a general audience could read and enjoy the story, but in reality, marketing to a broad audience isn't ideal. Like, I'm not the type of reader, well, I have read some historical fiction novels. It's not what I generally will read most. And I'm also not a big romance reader, although I have read some romance books. I know what I'm looking for. I know whether I'm in a bookstore or in a library or I'm shopping on Amazon, I know what type of book I'm looking for. So to be sure you're capturing sales, you want to focus on a core audience or a set of readers who are going to be looking for the type of book that you're going to be trying to sell them. So you want to think small and strategic. Think how that smaller, more defined audience can help you market via word of mouth about your book. And just some basic things you should know. You should know whether or not you write fiction or nonfiction. So obviously if you write fiction, you want to break it down even more. Which genre? Is it romance, suspense, fantasy, historical? If you write nonfiction, is your book a memoir or is it self-help? Is it a manual? Is it a handbook or a guide? You really want to take the time to understand that genre of audience. And I'm spending time with this because a lot of authors I've come across, they don't know what genre they write. And that's really important, especially if you are independently published, then you already know behind the scenes when you're trying to submit your book to a book distributor that you have to have certain metadata up front. That metadata usually digs down into, well, what category does your book fit into? That's how Amazon and other booksellers are able to pull that book up, or how bookstores are going to place them in certain areas on a bookshelf. If you can define to them what genre your book is. So I'm going to take a bit of a commercial break, and when I come back, I'm going to talk a bit about how you break down your audience. And I'm going to talk a little bit from a nonfiction writer point of view, and then I'm going to talk from a fiction point of view, because they are very different, as I can tell you. When I put out my first nonfiction project, there are two very different marketing processes. So we'll take a commercial break so that you can hear about my nonfiction book, The Literary Entrepreneur Toolkit.
You're not just an author. You're a literary entrepreneur. The days of getting by without an online presence are over. Whether you are a traditionally published or self-published author, daydreaming about your bestseller will not sell a book. As soon as you have a release date, it's time to get down to the business of book marketing. If book marketing makes you cringe, think of this book as an investment and your personal business coach. The Literary Entrepreneur's Toolkit provides specific tools and tips to building and managing your online presence. The brainstorming sessions and step-by-step lessons will build your confidence as you prepare and implement your next book marketing plan.
All right, we are back, and you just heard about the Literary Entrepreneur's Toolkit. That is my first nonfiction book. And before I wrote it, I had completed 4 novels, so I had been concentrating on marketing fiction. So I can tell you the readers for my fiction and nonfiction are probably different, although there may be some crossover for readers who are aspiring writers or authors. Most book marketers will agree it may be slightly easier to develop a platform for nonfiction books than fiction books, and that's oftentimes because as a nonfiction writer, you usually have pretty much kind of a niche audience that is seeking the information in your book. And this information, you can actually expand from the book. You can provide it online via a blog. You may start out as a blogger and decide to put those blog posts into a book or ebook. A lot of nonfiction authors, they can branch out and do a little bit more teaching outside of what they do, especially if they have a book that's providing solutions. So You may see some nonfiction authors doing webinars or hosting seminars or doing teleconferences, or like I'm doing now, they may be doing a podcast. There's just usually a lot that you can put into a book that will capture the reader's attention, and then not everything that you think might go into that book can you fit in there. Especially with my industry, things change so much that I decided, I was going to stretch out beyond my nonfiction platform to doing things where I can kind of keep up with the industry. And for those who listen to my podcast or follow me on my blog or follow me on social media, you will definitely see that, I try to make an effort to keep up, or any news from the publishing industry, I definitely post those things, or anything that's going on in social media, I try to keep up with those things. As a matter of fact, I think at the timing of recording this podcast, there's probably several things that have changed on Facebook alone since I put out my ebook. Another cool thing about a nonfiction writer, not to say that a fiction writer can't do this, but if you have strong speaking skills, you can definitely develop a pretty robust speaking platform that you can often use with your marketing your books. I always encourage my nonfiction clients to look for ways to be speakers at retreats or workshops or conferences, especially if it is something within your niche. You can always, ask for a table to put your books, in support of, if you do decide to do speaking for a fee, or you may decide you would like the audience to walk away with, purchasing your books from a table in the back. You can certainly do that. So if you have a book for singles, you want to, look for organizations who cater or minister to singles. If you have a book for marriage, then you want to look for partnerships or events with other organizations or individuals who deal with marriage issues. And the list can go on. If you write about health, there are so many different events or organizations that you can kind of pull out from your book and focus on, or you can even, pitch yourself to, I think I mentioned this in earlier podcasts, you can pitch yourself to the news media much better with a nonfiction novel, because oftentimes there are things going on the news, if you're tuned into the news, that, they may need an expert to come on and talk about. So definitely as a nonfiction writer, knowing your genre, knowing your audience, knowing the topics that you have to talk about are really important, and they'll help you attract readers to yourself and help you get visibility for yourself. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, and probably in the first podcast that I did, the introduction to the Literary Entrepreneur Podcast, I started writing my first novel in 2006, and I knew my focus would be on readers who like mystery or suspense. No surprise there. I told you earlier how I went from Nancy Drew to Mary Higgins Clark to reading pretty much, I would say, for fiction, probably 65 to 75% of what I read is a mystery, a cozy mystery, a suspense, or a thriller. And I largely jumped into writing because I didn't see that type of writing in Christian fiction, which is also another one of my genres. So when I talk to people, I always explain to them, I write Christian fiction. It's definitely faith-based, but there may be a murder mystery in there. So it's definitely under the Christian fiction genre, which is the umbrella. Underneath there, my novels are mystery or suspense. So that's how I dig into knowing what my genre is, and also it helps me write what I write. I know I want to do a cozy mystery with a whodunit, so I'm thinking in mind, who is my audience, who's actually going to pick up this book to read it. So I know my core audience is usually going to be between, I would say, the ages of 35 to 55. I know of younger readers who pick up my books who may be in their 20s. I have even heard of teenagers who pick up the books. But I definitely write for probably that audience age group of 35 to 55. These are women who are usually already have careers, they have families. You might be asking, well, how do I come up with that much detail? Many authors who write fiction, they may spend quite a bit of time creating author profiles or sketches. And so these profiles will help with character development, but they also prove to be helpful later when you're thinking about your readership. I'm not about supporting being a cookie cutter writer, but you should be aware of what sells. For example, when I first started writing my first novel, I wrote what I considered to be a suspense novel. And after a few author friends, they read through my manuscript and they kind of encouraged me, you should really add some romance to this novel. And I was like, well, I don't really read romance and I don't think I could write romance. But after really thinking about it, these same demographics that I talked to you about earlier that I know I appeal to, those same demographics obviously like romance. Romance is the number one best-selling genre in fiction, and that's what women tend to buy. So keeping that in mind, I went back and I restructured my first novel, which is When Rain Falls, to include a female and a male point of view. And so my romantic suspense series was born, and I pretty much kept that same format for the entire book series, which is a trilogy. There's usually always a female and a male point of view, and it worked out pretty good. I like the fact that I was able to provide a bit of romance for women who like that, but also I was able to add in the mystery or suspense elements that I was also looking for. So it's important to be pretty specific. If you're like, that's too specific, let me just ask you this. If you have ever self-published a book and you had problems with trying to narrow down the focus of your book, like you're getting ready to upload this to Amazon and you're looking at the categories, it's really important that you think about who is the buyer on the other end. And so if you ever had some type of trouble with that, you really need to go back to your book. If you really don't know where to start with finding your target audience, you may want to do a bit of an analysis. And while I don't like to do comparisons, they are important and vital to understanding your target audience, especially like if you work with a traditional publisher, they will want you to include other books for comparison in your marketing plans. So the first thing you do is just start, trying to figure out what your genre is by searching on Amazon.com. And sometimes in these podcasts, I feel like I am promoting Amazon.com, but they're the place to go. So you can ask yourself the following questions while you're, doing a search on other books. What other authors share the readership that you're looking for to purchase your books? What can you do different to appeal to those readers and keep your stories unique? Just to kind of break in there's lots of favorite authors under the Christian fiction genre. For me to become unique in that genre, I chose specifically to write what I didn't see a lot of. I didn't see a lot of mystery and suspense novels, so I chose to write what I love under the Christian fiction genre. Okay, so that's just an example. So what can you do different to appeal to readers and keep your stories unique? And if you're self-published or indie published, you can even break this down to your book packaging. How can you make sure you have a book cover that equals the quality of a traditional published book that's in the same genre as you? Book covers, that's a whole other topic, but how many of you can find, or you can kind of tell the genre of a book from a book cover? You really should. You should be able to look at the type of cover. For example, I can pretty much look at most book covers and kind of tell, yeah, that's definitely going to be a suspense book. That's definitely going to be a romance book. That's definitely going to be a fantasy book. Those are things that help a reader decide if this is something that they want to read, especially, if it's in the genre that they love to read often. So have you done a good job of finding your readers? If not, let's go back and get that down pat, because there's no amount of bookmarking is going to help you if you're reaching out to people who don't really care about your book. I mean, if you have a historical fiction novel and you're trying to push that book on people who don't read historical fiction, you have a problem with your book marketing plan. So you want to rethink that. Okay, so today's podcast was all about who is your target reader. So I'm hoping that after listening, you may want to go back and listen to the podcast again, that you'll have a better idea on how to pursue your target reader. In the next podcast, I'm going to come and talk a little bit about one of the best pieces of writing advice that relates to marketing that I have ever received. I'm going to share that with you. And I'm just excited about being able to share that podcast with you. So tune in to the next podcast as I talk to you about the best writing advice I've ever received when it comes to marketing. So I'm going to close out and remind you, you're more than an author. You're a literary entrepreneur. Writing and marketing books is a business. Let's learn how to tell the world about your book together.